Can you hear the sound okay?
I hear you well.
Perfect.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Holding On with Holder, where I talk to interesting people about interesting topics. My name is Steve Holder, and I am your host. My guest this evening is Cathy Lins, who helps people deal with trauma, stress, and anxiety through holding workshops. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to chat with you. I've actually been listening to some of your podcasts, listening in on some of the conversations that you've been having.
I've talked to some interesting people.
That's for sure.
Well, tell us about you, Cathy. Who are you and what's your story?
Well, that could take us a while, but let's hit the highlights along the way. Okay. I currently work with a ministry. I am working with two other priests, and we've created an organization called Gather My Lost Sheep, working through that whole new process of new nonprofits and how that goes. And we really came to that point just because all of us have worked with and among or are survivors of abuse. And we just really noticed that there's a trend here where, believe it or not, abuse victims haven't fared very well, in case you're following the news at all of what's happening there. And we knew we had a call. I'm working with two priests. I myself am a lay Dominican, so I'm a member of the Dominican order. And we thought, what is it that we can do in the face of that to really shift things around? And so we really spent some time at prayer. And it was so funny because at the time, I spend my time in adoration. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, they'll take a consecrated host and put it in a monstrance. And Catholics believe in the real presence of Christ in those moments. So it's a chance to really, spend that time personally with him in that flesh form. And for me, it was that gather my lost sheep, Cathy. That's what I really want you to do. That's where I want you to go. And then as we were praying about it more, and it was like, trauma-informed parishes, go. That's what I want you to do. And by the way, write a book on that too. And I'm like, okay, taking notes as quickly as I can. Okay. And so I've been working in August of this last year, we launched a Facebook group, Trauma-Informed Parishes. At this point, we've got 77 members from across the country, plus a couple of other countries, of people who are just interested in what we can do to really help the church start to take a look at and deal with where trauma fits in. Now, we have some folks who come in and they say, can we also look at the other areas of mental health? And that's not a hard thing at all, because so often when you look at the research and studies and talk with people, trauma is right there and directly connected in most areas of mental health issues. Yeah. Either because trauma, like in my case, I'm an adult survivor of years of child abuse. So I come by struggles with mental illness from the environment that I was in. Yeah. And so that's where I come along this particular path. And I did what a lot of survivors did. If this happened to you as a child, I left home at 17 and I'm like, I'm never dealing with that again. It's behind me. It's done. Or so I thought. I went on, lived my life, did all kinds of exciting things. I train and work with nonprofits. I work a lot in the health and human services area. And I hit to the point where I was in my 40s and was just this sense of, you need to deal with this. And I'm like, no, thank you very much for applying, God, but I'm really not interested in bringing that up, and you shouldn't either. Just leave it buried. And the funniest part was my sister had asked me, she says, do you want to go with me? Let's take this Lord Teach Me to Pray program. It's teaching people Ignatian exercises and how to pray with scripture, to really converse and talk with God. And God will show you what it is that keeps you from him, what he would love to have in that relationship that you have. And so I signed up for it. And God's like, that's great. I see you signed up for this program. So you want to really address what is it that keeps us apart. So about the abuse that you experienced as a child. And I'm like, oh, no, you didn't. And it was just that he was like, yeah, because that's what we got to talk about. Yeah. And frankly, that's what I now spend my time talking with others about, because I say, here's the thing, when people experience trauma from whatever source it is, the big question is always, where was God when this happened? And it's just that when people experience abuse, it really distorts their sense of who God is. Why would a God who is so loving allow something like this to happen? Where was he? Why didn't he stop this? Why did he stop it for that person, but not for this person? Because you always hear these great stories of people that, well, I think of the woman, she was talking about their Rwanda and the Civil War, and she had to hide in the bathroom for this many weeks and constantly praying the rosary, and they were never found. They were protected. And we were just like, like, how is it that happens for some people, but it doesn't happen for others? What's the difference? And those are those hard questions that abuse victims and others really have in this line.
Yeah,
I'll be quiet for a little bit so you can get a word in. I apologize.
that's okay. I don't know if you know it or not, but I was confirmed Catholic last year.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I grew up as a Southern Baptist.
Okay, okay.
So there's a lot of similarities, except Southern Baptists don't get a cuss and drink.
There's that. Well, and it's been interesting for me because I don't know if you follow Grace, but they're an organization that's working with the Protestant churches also with abuse victims. And they did something that I thought was absolutely brilliant. Bose, who is Billy Graham's grandson, was the former executive director. He helped start it. He just recently transitioned out of that role. But what they did was they talked to insurance companies and said, you know what? All of these churches are going to try to be getting liability insurance. We'd like to ask you to please let them know that you won't give them liability insurance unless they agree to take our courses on how to actually prevent abuse, protect survivors, all of those kinds of things. And so literally, if they want their liability insurance, they've got to take their programs. And I'm like, that's smart thinking. They have an actual avenue to actually be able to do that.
Now, are you a cradle Catholic?
I am.
Okay.
I always, and I went to Catholic school. And that's been all the way through. I've never known anything else.
Yeah. I have friends that tell horror stories about Catholic school.
Well, I can't say that. I had a pretty good experience with the school system, so
Yeah.
been very lucky that way.
Yeah. So what's your favorite part about being Catholic?
My favorite part, I love pilgrimages and just some of the places that I've gotten to go. I'm very blessed, and I can't explain always how I get to go to some of the places that I do, because I had one year where in the midst of dealing with the abuse, if you'd asked me at the beginning of the year, I would tell you, I'm not going anywhere. I have no money. I got nothing, and I ended up going on 3 pilgrimages, and they always all seemed to fall in my lap. So I got to go to Eastern Europe with a parish out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And on the last stop on the way was in Poland to the Chapel of Divine Mercy, where Saint Faustina is buried. So if you follow any of the Divine Mercy, which was, of course, last Sunday was instituted, it's that opening of God to, for mercy following Easter. And she has a diary of her conversations with Christ and him asking her to please help proclaim this, because I want to pour out my mercy on people. If people only knew the mercy that I have, I want for all of them to be saved, to come home. So I got to go to that particular trip. I then later that year went to the shrines, Marian shrines of in France, Portugal, and Spain. So I went to Fatima and I went to Lourdes, both healing locations. Terrific experiences. And then last but least that year, it was the beatification of John Paul II. So I actually got to be in Rome for his beatification.
Great. Not too many people.
And of course, it's Rome by Divine Mercy Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that last part?
I said not too many people have that experience.
And it was a little tricky. It was very odd. I've traveled all over lots of different countries and I've never had a problem. But those 3 trips, I developed cellulitis every single time. on this exact same spot, which my doctor tells me is astronomically unlikely.
Hmm.
That just doesn't normally happen. And
Yeah.
so the day of the beatification, I actually stayed back because I got an outbreak of cellulitis again. So I needed to have my feet up, but we were so close that I just had to open my window and I could still hear everything was happening at St. Peter's. And it was
Yeah.
also interesting because they were like, you're lucky you weren't there, because there were so many people that some of the people in front actually thought they might be crushed just from the push of people wanting to be up close as possible as they went
Yeah.
through. There were just a lot of people there.
Yeah. I saw on your, I guess on your Facebook page, you mentioned something about mental health first aid. What is that exactly?
That is a actually an international program that it started in Australia, has now come to the United States and recognized as an effective practice. The idea behind it is, if you've ever heard of CPR,
Yeah.
okay, CPR won't make you a medical expert, but it will help you keep somebody alive until the medical experts get there.
Yeah.
When people are having problems or experiencing mental health issues for the very first time or in crisis, this trains people in the same way that people get trained for CPR, so they can actually assess and say, is this person a danger to themselves or others? If they are, if that's kind of the kind of crisis, then here are the steps that you should take to help bring in help and keep them safe until more medical help can get there. If they're not in crisis, here's what else we can do to encourage them, help them stay calm, think through what kind of help could they get, know what kind of resources are in our local communities, and what other things can we do for self-care for yourself to help keep yourself safe as you're going through whatever's happening. And so it's a skill that everybody hopefully would be able to learn. And
Yeah.
my goal in getting trained is so that I can actually help parishes know what to do, because I am fortunate in that I've gotten to do training with priests and bishops and other members of diocesan staff around the country because of a training program that I was in. And at the time, one of the priests turned to me and he said, what do you do when you're dealing with people who are mentally ill? And I said, well, as it turns out, I actually know the answer to that question. But no, you're not going to take me off schedule. We're still going to get on schedule again for our talk. But it was that opportunity to talk about that program. And they were all like, so there's a program that could help us? And so when I was going through just in the last month to get that certification as an instructor so that I could then train others, some of the parish secretaries were like, oh, I need this training. We have someone like what you're describing at least once a week on a regular basis, and we need some guidance, some idea of what to do so that we can help keep people safe.
Yeah. So you help people to deal with their struggles and their trauma, and also to train other people to deal with their struggles and trauma.
Mm-hmm. And to walk with them. But I always tell them, I said, I'm not a mental, how should I say this? I'm not a trained medical personnel. I know research because I've worked with non-health services. I know program design. I know best practices and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm also somebody who lives with those challenges. So I bring a perspective that some people are like, oh, wow. How should I say this? Are you familiar with the AmeriCorps Vista program? Or the AmeriCorps program and National Service?
I think I've heard of it.
Okay, it's, if you've ever heard of Peace Corps.
Oh, yeah.
The Peace Corps goes abroad. The AmeriCorps stays here locally in the United States. The
Okay.
Vista actually does, they work with the indirect or capacity building work. A lot of times they'll work with communities that are in need, poverty communities, what have you. I got a chance to actually, I've been doing their training for like 23 years now for when they first start out and start working in community. And one of the things that I got to do was do the trauma-informed care conversation with them. Talk about what happens when someone has a flashback, what happens when they're dealing with depression, what's happening in the midst of anxiety, and why is safety such a big deal for people who are dealing with trauma. And they're like, oh, this was nice to know the research, but knowing what's happening from the perspective of somebody who's lived through that, who deals with that on a regular basis, that was huge. And so they just found that far more helpful than some of the other programs that they've had. And I'm like, if I can bring that combination, I can at least go help somebody else.
Yeah.
They
So
don't
you
have to
travel
have
around
the
the
same
country
challenge.
doing these workshops then?
Say that again?
You travel around the country doing
I
these
used to.
workshops? Okay,
Now everything's virtual.
okay. I've
I
heard
used to be
that
on the road
story
a lot.
before.
Say that again?
I said, I've heard that story before. A lot of people have to do that now.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see whether they will still continue to do things virtually, because I'm hearing some people say, now that we know that we can actually do this, it's a lot cheaper not to have to fly everywhere and rent
Yeah.
hotels. And I'm sure that the travel industry doesn't want to hear that, but
Yeah. Yeah, it has its advantages, but there's nothing like people having that personal one-on-one, interaction, the fellowship and all of that. It's nothing replaces that.
and it's the networking that I think is a little harder to do.
Yeah, we can't even sing in our church anymore. Can you guys sing in your parish?
Not currently. I know the diocese over can, and we live very close to the diocesan line, and so my sister will occasionally go over to see my aunt and uncle, and she's like, I got to sing at church.
There you go. There you go.
I know, it's those little things that were just like,
Yeah.
yes.
It's just something we've always taken for granted, but now we don't. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things we probably took for granted that now we
Yeah.
have to rethink.
Yeah. So do you work with other churches or just Catholic parishes?
I've tried to focus right now on the Catholic Church, just because I see it as the greatest need, at least in this realm. I mean, there's plenty of work to be done. Now, the work that I've done with nonprofits, I've done that with a lot of different churches. That's it, because the work I've done with nonprofits has been on how do they build up their programs? How do they handle their fundraising? What can we do on their finances? Because I've worked with federal projects that work with mental health, that work with substance abuse, that work with HIV, works with family violence. So there's been a variety of settings, from healthcare centers to churches to state agencies, who have been looking for help. And so that I've been able to do the subcontract work with the federal government for those.
Yeah, okay. So what's the main advice you give to people that are suffering with trauma?
The things that I would tell people who are dealing with trauma, and keep it in mind, my workshops right now aren't directly for the people with trauma. It's for the church folks who want to work with trauma. And the big thing I tell them is, it's be ready for the fact that they will probably test you, because they have a hard time trusting people. And they're looking to see, are you just going to be somebody else who leaves them? Are you just going to be somebody else who tosses them aside? And so, and the other thing that I was talking with the Father Mark about, the other priest that I work with, is he said, it's the difference between reacting and responding. Oftentimes in that testing and that pushing that people might do, because they're trying to test the boundaries to find out if they can really count on that you're sturdy, that you're going to be there. The natural thing that can be is you get irritated and you snap.
Yeah.
And he said, as priests and as members of the church, it's really let's not react, let's stop, think, and choose our response. Think about the long-term component. And it's funny, because I said to Father Mark, it's interesting that you say that, because in therapy, as someone going through recovery, that's the same conversation my therapist has with me. And he's like, yeah, you all need to work on that, and we all need to work on that. This is a universal thing for us to all stop and think about it for a little bit.
So you struggle with PTSD, anxiety, and depression, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Me too. Welcome to the club.
Mm-hmm. We're members together, not in a club that we necessarily wanted to sign up for, but
Yeah.
I always figure, well, Lord, there's got to be a reason why you thought this was a good idea.
Yeah.
So let me know what's next. Where should we go?
Yeah. Do you find that reading sometimes help with your anxiety or depression?
It does, particularly I will spend a lot of time, because I'm a lay Dominican, I spend a lot of time looking at like some of the different church readings and books. I look for some of the different Christian books that are out there that actually deal with abuse, deal with trauma, deal with suicide prevention, and now some of the aspects around that to say, like, what else is there that we can learn from, benefit from, to make things better. And I don't know if I tried to follow some like Mary DeMuth's work. She talks primarily with the Protestant churches. And I know that Dr. Diane Langberg works with Grace. She's a longtime trauma therapist who has written Suffering in the Heart of God, really taking a look and say, like, what is it that we should be aware of, and how does Christ heal that which has been harmed through the process of trauma?
Well, are you happy that we have a Catholic president now?
Well, there's some things I wish he would actually be faithful on in what the Catholic Church teaches. That's I guess the thing that I look at and say, it's important to be more than just something in name. It actually look to say, what's your behavior, and do you live out what you proclaim? If not, we've got a little bit of a disconnect.
Yeah, I wish that he was pro-life, but at least he does a whole lot better than the other guy and lots of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you keep up with politics and current events?
To some extent. I've actually gave up TV a while ago, so I actually get my news from other locations at this point. I just decided this wasn't where I wanted to spend my time, so I don't.
Yeah. So what do you think about the current state of the world?
Well, I said to someone, I said, this last year I've seen an awful lot of things that make me think that the pandemic and the wildfires and the floods, and boy, if I didn't know better, I would think the end of the world is coming.
Yeah.
Just the trends that I see there, I'm like, huh. But I always tease people, I'm like, just on the off chance that it actually is, let's all make sure that we get to confession and clean up everything here and make sure that we're ready just in case it is.
It's easy to look at things going on and say, well, this country's worse than it's ever been. But then you look back at American history, we had 250 years of slavery, and then 4 years of civil war that killed 750,000 Americans. So, this is nothing, I guess, in comparison to that.
Along the way. Well, do you have contacts in other countries? Because I have to say, I have had a few friends on Facebook who are actually in some of the other countries that I've visited along the way. So it's interesting to hear their perspective of what they see when they're here.
Yeah. I've interviewed people from several different countries, actually. So it's always good to get different perspectives.
Back when September 11th took place with the towers coming down, I got invited to go train in Cairo, Egypt, 6 months after. And it was fascinating because they were supposed to come to the US to do the training, but they were too scared to come. So they're like, would you be willing to go to Cairo? Okay. And of course, my family is like, you're going to be killed. Are you out of your mind? They just thought that was the worst thing possible. But it was so fascinating talking to the folks in Cairo. I was working with nonprofits from out Egypt, and they all came to Cairo, and we were talking about things like strategic planning and how do they do better program development, how they do their evaluation, all those kinds of things. And it made me particularly chuckle because at that point, the big hoo-ha-ha was the fact that emails from anyone emailing the Middle East, their emails are being scrutinized and they were being watched very carefully. And I thought, well, I'm probably being scrutinized right now as we speak. And if that's the case, if the federal government learns more about performance measures and evaluation and better programs, I'm all for it. So let them read my emails, because that's what I was literally sending over to Egypt at that particular point. It was, go ahead.
I was going to ask, has COVID hit your family or any of your friends?
Say that again. COVID?
COVID
is, unfortunately, I have a good friend who passed away just a couple of weeks ago from COVID. So that's,
Sorry to hear
I've been
that.
trying to support their family in that. Some of my family members more distantly have their children have, their teenagers have got it and brought it home, and so far are like, I have elderly relatives who are in their like 80s to not or mid 90s. So far as we know, they haven't had it. I did go have the very first shot. That did not go well, and I have been instructed not to go for the second. So
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who ended up in the emergency room process. That was a little scary.
Yeah, I'm sure. So is there anything else you want people to know about what you do or how they can benefit from what you do?
I just really encourage folks, if they're interested and they're on Facebook, they can come to our Trauma Informed Parishes public Facebook page, or they can, if you're Catholic and want to participate in what's happening, you can join the Trauma Informed Parishes private group, and we'll be happy to talk with folks. We've actually put out a series of trainings to help people know what is trauma, what are the different forms that causes it. And so we have some work that's out there. And I'd also just invite people, if they get a chance, to check out the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And there's a list of 10 questions that talk about different types of trauma. And the reason I say that is check it out, because when I did that training for the AmeriCorps, and I said, I am survivor of trauma, the state leader in that particular state, oh, well, thank you for your service. And I said, thank you for my service. Oh, you think I'm a military member because I have PTSD? I said, actually, I have complete respect for the military, but I don't have any military experience. I never served. And in the process of reviewing that list of 10 items for the ACEs work, she called me afterwards and she said, Cathy, I might have unaddressed PTSD or trauma. She goes, I didn't realize that the stuff I experienced is in fact trauma.
Yeah.
And I hear this a lot where people will notice they're having difficulties in some areas of their life, but they can't seem to figure out why. And when they see that list, they're like, oh, I may have undiagnosed and untreated trauma as well. So please, folks, check that out. Get some help. Don't wait. They say the average wait time for depression to get treatment is 10 years. The longer you wait, the harder it is to treat. So please get in, get help.
It was about 55 years for me. So I
Because you
know.
always kind of muscle through.
Yeah. Well, Cathy, thank you very much for being my guest. I've certainly enjoyed talking to you and learning more about what you do. And the Facebook group is called Trauma Informed Parishes.
Parishes, correct.
Okay. Well, folks, check that out. And thank you for tuning in to Holding On with Holder. Please subscribe to my channel and feel free to share this video all over social media. Cathy, thank you again, and I wish you much success. I know God will keep blessing you for what you're doing, and I will let you go, and you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.
Bye now.